There's a new policy that's ignited a huge debate across university campuses in India. It's the UGC Regulations 2026. But what exactly is going on here? Is this a much-needed reform, or does it come with some serious risks? Let's get into it. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at why these new rules were even on the table. Then, we'll dig into what they actually say. After that, we'll explore the big controversy they've kicked up, trace the story from campus protests all the way to the Supreme Court, and finally, figure out what might happen next. So, let's start at the beginning. Why were these new regulations even needed in the first place? Understanding the why behind them is absolutely key to understanding the entire debate.
Yeah, this isn't just some abstract policy argument. It's rooted in some very serious real-world problems, specifically allegations of ongoing caste-based discrimination on campuses and, tragically, a rise in student suicides.
The real push for these new rules came directly from the Supreme Court of India. In a case that was already in progress, the court basically said that the existing rules from 2012 just weren't cutting it. So it told the University Grants Commission, the UGC, to go back and create a much stronger framework, one that was really focused on protecting students from historically marginalized communities.
Okay, so we know why they were created, but what do these new regulations actually propose? Let's take a closer look at what they would have required universities to do.
The new framework was going to require some pretty big changes inside every university. For one, every single institution would have to set up an anti-discrimination cell just to handle complaints. They'd also have to appoint a dedicated equity officer to make sure the policy was being followed, submit annual reports to the UGC to prove it, and face much tougher penalties, like having their funding pulled if they didn't comply.
Now this is where we get to the real heart of the matter. It all comes down to a specific definition. The regulations defined caste-based discrimination as something that happens to members of the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and other backward classes. This single definition is right at the center of the entire controversy. And this is where the debate really exploded. The intention was clear: protect vulnerable students. So why was there such an immediate and massive backlash? Well, it's a classic case of good intent versus potential negative impact. So the whole issue really centers on these two clauses. You have Clause 3C, which defines caste-based discrimination specifically for students from SC, ST, and OBC communities. But then you have another clause, 3E, that gives a really broad definition of discrimination for everyone, covering things like religion, race, and gender. And this is what made critics ask, wait a minute, if we already have a general rule that protects everyone, why do we need a separate, exclusive one? And this brings up a massive question. Does this specific wording actually help create equity, or could it accidentally cause a whole new set of problems? You see this all the time in policymaking, right? Good intentions don't always lead to good outcomes. Critics had a list of major concerns. They argued the rules were unfair to students in the general category, they worried the system could be misused, and that there was no system to penalize false complaints. And, on a much bigger level, they claimed it could violate Article 14 of the Indian Constitution, which is all about equality for all citizens. As you can probably guess, a debate this intense didn't stay on campus for very long. In fact, it escalated incredibly quickly, from university protests to a high-stakes battle in the courtroom. And this timeline just shows you how fast it all happened. The regulations are announced on January 13th. Just a few days later, you have huge protests breaking out in Delhi, JNU, and Hyderabad. And by January 29th, the Supreme Court has already stepped in and paused the whole thing. All of that in just a couple of weeks. During the court hearing, even the Supreme Court bench seemed pretty worried about the wording. There was one clause that they felt could actually lead to student segregation, which prompted the Chief Justice to say, "For God's sake, please don't do that." So, the big takeaway from all this legal action was a complete stop. The Supreme Court ordered an immediate halt to the implementation of these new rules. All right, so with the new regulations stuck in limbo, where does that leave everything now? What is the future of equity in Indian higher education? I mean, really, what does this legal holding pattern mean for the students and universities on the ground today? With the 2026 rules paused, what's in place to protect students right now?
So here's where we are at the moment. The 2026 regulations are on hold. The Supreme Court has temporarily brought back the old 2012 rules to fill the gap, and now the UGC has to go back to the drawing board and re-examine the whole thing, with a committee of legal experts also set to review the draft. Ultimately, what this all shows is that the debate isn't really about whether the intention is good. I think everyone agrees on the goal. It's now become a much deeper conversation about how to write policy with clarity, how to strike the right balance, and how to ensure fairness when you actually put it into practice. So what's the future for these regulations? Well, it seems pretty clear it won't be decided by the UGC alone anymore. The final version of this policy is probably going to be shaped by a lot more legal review and public discussion. This debate is definitely far from over.